I have another question for you. Could you please tell us how COVID-19 has reversed the gains for the nation in general and affected women's tough double shift narrative?
So, like I told you, I mean, women are supposed to be at the forefront of everything. I mean, you look at COVID. I mean, look at how they were the first responders in the community. Look at how we have heard of so many, there's so much of data, anecdotes, there's NCRB data. There are multiple data sources which actually tell us about, how violence affected them, how they were the ones who the entire care burden came onto them. The schools were closed. So, women were supposed to be at home. The men lost their jobs, the women lost their jobs, but it was the men who the women who bore the brunt of all of that. So when it comes to anything at the receiving end, it's going to be the women. So I'm like a champion of women's rights. So perhaps not really loved for that in many spaces, but I'm just saying that so if everything is kind of revolving around her, and then she's the one who's to be bearing the brunt for everything, how do we really make her space a little more enabling? So we said that the social protections, she was not even considered. I mean, women were not considered even for immunization, for vaccine, in the first lot that happened. So if they were pushed to the background, and that is where kind of we need to really bring them to the forefront to be in the center of discussions. They have to be the focus of all kinds of social policy and social protection measures that needs to be kind of taken care of. The care work discussion really needs a lot of more focus, Timisha and colleagues. I think because we've really not taken care of the fact that if a woman is kind of and of course one very interesting data is I mean, I think it's a data which is pretty well known, that about almost like around the world, women carry out far more care work than men. It's up to actually 10 times as much, according to the latest OECD development, the SIGI data, the Social Institutions and Gender Index data. It's about 1 is to 10. So you can imagine how much of free time do we really give for women? And we, typically we don't even talk about women and the leisure space. We're only talking about women looking at fodder care, at elderly care, at sibling care, at child care, and if there's any informal work, yes. And now, not to forget her work towards the non productive or the non-economy space, where she's contributing to the agriculture work, but then there's no return in terms of economic gains for her. So so it's all about non-productive, non-economic. We casually, very comfortably want to kind of term it as non-productive work, but how much is she really contributing to the economy is something that's really not being accounted for. I think that's where the discussion needs to be kind of driven towards. I'll stop here, Tamisha.
Thank you. Now I would like to ask Ms. Navya, how did the disruption in supply chains impact the home-based workers, specifically in the context of women?
Thank you so much for that question. So basically, as a network, one of our core agendas is to kind of bring collectivity to workers and to the challenges that they face when accessing as operating as labor in economies. So in the aftermath of COVID, HomeNet South Asia undertook a 7-nation 2-year study on the impact of COVID-19 on women home-based workers in the region. And I think Shalini Kala, who headed that research, is part of the audience today. So what we saw is that first and foremost that home-based workers who were operating in supply chains were one of the first workers to be hit. That's because a lot of our raw material inputs for our goods comes from China, and because China was where was the epicenter of the pandemic in the first year, home-based workers were the first to lose access to work. Also, they did not get paid for orders that they had already executed, because immediately the communication from the brands, from the warehouses and from their intermediaries was that we have not been paid from the top, the market is down, so therefore we cannot pay. So they lost access to the income that they had already made. And then once lockdowns became a reality, they lost complete access to work. So it was pretty much 0 days of work for a majority of home-based workers across these 7 nations, including India. What we've seen in these 2 years is, even though the lockdowns became less strict and women were able to access work, it didn't stand at a zero, but they are not able to make the income that they that matches their pre-pandemic earnings. And let's face the fact that women home-based workers, even before the pandemic, were not even making minimum wage in all of these countries across South Asia. When it comes to relief, they had no access to relief because they have no recognition as workers. Third and foremost, whatever support came from representative organizations or from private or government aid, where you had access to basic rations and minimal cash transfers, especially in India. And imagine working 30, 40 years and lining up to access basic rations and a minimum 500 rupee Jan Dhan account transfer. I also think we should think about, where do home-based worker incomes go? First of all, they go towards the education of their children. And we see through the study that many are not able to afford that education anymore. So a lot of children have now dropped off from school, or their parents are struggling to pay their fees. Home-based worker incomes also go towards household expenses. So you have rent, utility, and access to healthcare. All of this, they are not able to do anymore. So the feasibility, first of all, I think India's healthcare is anyway very highly privatized. And even that has come down now. Accessibility has been pushed down further. We also see through the study a very, very alarming trend that has come up, that home-based workers and their families are in huge debt. In Mumbai, it's about 650% of their annual income. That's the number in a city like Mumbai. So it not just has an effect on the worker and her immediate family, but this will have an effect on the future generations as well, because we all know that they borrow from money lenders or informal institutions, and we all know how high those interest rates are. So it will take years, if not decades, to pay that money back. And the fourth is the bit about hunger. Women have kept themselves hungry. The older people in their households have kept themselves hungry. They skip meals. And the nutrition value of the food that they are consuming also has reduced. So again, that has a huge impact on her health, on the health of her children, on the health of the family. So yeah.
Thank you, Navya, for sharing interesting perspective about how the situation with home-based, the COVID-19 situation impacted home-based workers and indirectly also impacted the children's health and education. Would anyone want to add anything to this from the other panelists?
I can add something, Timisha, if that's okay. I think, first of all, I think what Navya was saying, I think it kind of beautifully sets in with our formative research findings as well, which kind of happened right in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. And yeah, I mean, those common tracks are always there. Like, loss of employment was something that we also observed a lot in informal waste pickers. Informal waste picking also means like, collecting, sorting and recycling and then selling it to scrap shops. Like, so if scrap shops were kind of running out of business, then, they don't have the capital or the funds to pay back to the waste pickers who are getting scraps to them, right? So that was a huge impact, like, chain wise, that we definitely saw. And what it also led was that, a lot of people in the community were dependent on aid, right? So from NGOs, from civic societies, for ration or anything else. I mean, that's a lot of aid dependence was definitely seen. And a very interesting thing that we saw in the formative research was that, COVID kind of, with respect to informal sector waste pickers, it kind of heightened the kind of a stigmatization they were already facing with the general population. So for example, like, now they were labeled as people who are like carriers of diseases or viruses, or because of the way they appear and all that. So I think that was a very fascinating thing that we saw. And another fascinating thing that we saw was like, like young waste pickers, like, those who are in like, 18, 19 cohort or adolescents who are like just starting into this profession. They deliberately used to dress up nicely so that, so they are not obstructed by police or those people who are monitoring lockdown movements, so that, they can still get out of the home and do their job and collect some kind of a financial aid or money for the families. So I think these common tracks, definitely, I think it's there for whoever is working in the informal sector is what I would like to believe.
Madhuri, would you like to add anything?
No, Tamisha, I think I really echo what Nishant and Navya just mentioned, but I don't have any direct experience to share here. Thank you.
So Nishant, I have a question for you. Based on your experience of working with BBC project, right? Could you please explain on the gender, now since we are talking about gender specifically? So I have a question for you also in that domain. Could you please explain on the gender dimensions of waste picker stigmatization and how women are more vulnerable?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Tamisha. I think at a context, we need to understand one thing is that when we're talking about waste picking, it involves multiple aspects. Like, there is collecting, there is sorting, there is recycling, there is a selling of a portion. I think there is a sorting of high value from low value items and all that. So it's already a tough job anyways, right? It's not something which requires a very specific set of skill. But when you combine it with low income, irregular cash flow, or like, living in small rented kacha houses or places and health issues, it becomes incredibly challenging. And what our research has kind of led us to believe, as well as finding some other sources, is that it becomes more hard if you are a woman waste picker, like, where it's already hard anyways, the profession of waste picking. So on the gender dimension, I think a couple of very interesting things that we saw is that, one of the findings that we came from secondary research was that women do jobs that require longer hours of sitting or which are menial, right? So which I mean, they kind of fall under a trap of picking those professions or being stuck with those professions, which is like, low value and sitting at one places and everything. Most of those places have, they don't have the adequate infrastructure for toilets or a kind of a infrastructure for like a safe space that could make for those amenities which could help a women waste picker carry on with her life or a job, which is definitely rightfully so. We also saw that there is a dual burden, right? So when once you're kind of doing the waste picking job where you're carrying a lot of heavy stuff and roaming around the streets for some time, but then you're coming back home and doing all those caregiving and caretaking and family responsibilities as well. So that dual burden definitely came out very strongly in our own formative research that we did with waste pickers. There is definitely a kind of a female's face pay gap from scrap dealers and contractors. Like, there is a kind of tendency that men get paid more because, like, because of the skill, or they are able to do heavy lifting and everything, because ultimately everything sells by the kilo, right? And we also started that most of the informal waste picking is kind of done by older women and or like, or on a very younger kind of an age cohort. Like, it's the middle age or the younger women who are kind of starting out of job. They're still looking at developing skills which could give them salaried jobs. But I think it's not been it's been incredibly challenging for old women waste pickers. On vulnerability, I think there are two or three very good points came up from our formative research, which kind of like, shook us a bit as well. Like, for example, early morning or before sunrise is actually the best time to collect waste. I mean, that's how they kind of do their work, right? They're out in the streets and everything. And that timing of work, ultimately, it makes them more vulnerable, right? The safety is an issue. The kind of where they are, locations and everything, that's also an issue. Because that adds to the vulnerability anyways. COVID or not COVID, I mean, that's something which is there as a challenge for women who are into waste picking. Women have said that they feel scared to move out. They suffer more. There is a very prevalent domestic violence that is already seen in the community. And there is constant fights, and there are constant fights with their peers, with their supervisors. There is kind of a sexual harassment at workplace, which is very evident. So those challenges are definitely there. And lastly, a very interesting thing that came out again, which was kind of like shook us, was that they often wear dirty clothes. Women said that they wear dirty clothes in order to avoid attention and to avoid harassment, so that they can fit in with the group. And I think that kind of adds a lot of kind of layers on how the gender dimensions and vulnerability, they both exist in the lives of women who are into waste picking.
From what I understand, men wear better clothes and women try to wear not so better, like
men as in the younger ones. During the lockdown, that was just in the context of lockdown, that how they would used to go by and still earn the livelihoods, is because there was a lot of restriction around the movement. So they used to pose, they used to wear better clothes so that they can pass off as people like you and me, and they are less obstructed in all that. So but the challenges with women was something very different.
With women, it's just they want to avoid male gaze,
attention and harassment, and a lot of things at workplace.
Okay. Does anyone want to add anything to Nishant's perspective? No? Okay. So another question for you, Nishant, because your project is also quite interesting. It is from a media perspective, and like you're working for media. So could you please add on how communication can be a catalyst for change and action? And please feel free to give any examples.
See, often through communications or strategic communications, how we define it, or like behavior change communications, the task that we are set out to kind of accomplish, it's already a little tough, because we're talking about changing behaviors. Most of the times it's already ingrained as part of norms and deep-rooted values which are existing in society, right? Most of the dev sector programs and social programs, they come with a kind of a short program duration or shelf life. Like, it's a rapid kind of a small scale funding, which kind of happens for, like, I think for the average, it's a 2-3 year kind of a funding cycle that we are now seeing across the sector. So I think that kind of makes a little kind of the kind of a challenge a little peculiar, because you're talking about changing something which is deeply ingrained and requires long-term efforts and interventions. But at times, the reality is that you're working with finite shelf life and program duration, right? So what communications can do is, it can clearly establish, so though it's very difficult to kind of achieve that kind of a behavior change in a very short-term scale, but what communication can establish is a very, like a start of a movement along a pathway of change, to show that there has been a change in the right direction, or a momentum that has started, to actually use it as a case to kind of invest more resources and infrastructure to it. The change that we are looking to demonstrate, at least there should be a pathway of change, demonstrating shift in knowledge, attitudes, and discussions, and attitudes among the respondents. When we communicate, we put out front and forward, center stage of what we want our audiences to kind of believe. In this case, for Invaluables, I'm integrating that example into this question as well. What it meant for Invaluables is that we wanted this population of Bengaluru to think of informal waste pickers as their invaluable friends, right? So we wanted to start with that note. And then we kind of build the case up, once we see some kind of a pathway of change, we kind of brick on by brick, how, why, we kind of build those things. But during the entire set of communication to kind of cause change, every time there is a social media post talking about Invaluables, it's talking about, it reinforces the desired shift in perception. It's all hammering the same message in different ways and in frequencies. Our research and audience segmentation we did before starting the campaign, it clearly showed us that who are the categories of audiences we're dealing with. There'll always be audiences who will be easy to kind of motivate, nudge, and shift, right? Compared to there are others who will be a little difficult to kind of tackle. So I think as designers of communication strategy or program, I think it's kind of it's as visible to look out who your low hanging fruits are. Where do you kind of start that change to at least cause something that will again reach out to a critical mass down the line. Lastly, I think then we kind of, when we start the communication, it's always good to kind of put it in a larger context as well. For example, when we're talking about contribution of waste pickers in Bangalore in the city for waste management, you can yes have an isolated conversation, but you can also find ways to enter into the climate conversation or plastic and recycling and environmental pollution kind of space as well, instead of just talking about perceptions and everything. So that's another way of kind of taking into it. And finally, I think what we want to know is that when we're designing communication, it has to be pitched as self-interest. Like, it cannot be philanthropy or altruism or something that you do as charity. It has to be something that comes out as strong self-interest. It's something that you definitely kind of believe in and everything. That job is absolutely tough, but as I said, demonstrate a pathway of change, target a lower hanging fruit, tie into a larger conversation, and probably then there's definitely a kind of a shot that you can definitely have in. Last, I'll just close by saying that when we started with phase one, like as I was talking about, there is, what we can definitely see is that there is a shift in an awareness of informal waste, because among those who are exposed to invaluables, after 3 months of exposure to the content, so it was 10% as baseline, the awareness, it increased to 16%, right? After exposure to the content. There has been a higher appreciation and recognition of informal waste pickers as well. People have, there is more recognition of what the work that they do, their discussions at workplace, the living conditions and everything. And there is a larger discussion also, among people about the work. The research showed that from 49% at baseline, it has gone to 60% after the first phase. And it kind of also triangulated with what we did with a social listening software called Meltwater, that after the 3 months of campaign, we saw a 41% increase in online chatter around informal waste pickers. So I think I'll just say, close by saying that these are the small nuggets of pieces that you can start putting on the strategy, because constraints are going to be same for everyone who is designing communication in these days. So I think the idea is to kind of how do you kind of start demonstrating a pathway of change and then lead to the critical mass down the line.
Yeah. And with digitalization, it's even more important to focus on communication, and we all are trying to do that.
Yes, and also, but with increased digitalization, that comes with a caveat that understanding our audiences to see that if they are the right consumers of digital or not, because there is still in India, there is the digital divide is bridging up, but there is still quite of a gap, and especially with women, right? They would have, there is a household access to phone instead of a personal access to phone. So how do you reach out to that women ultimately? So yes, so I think understanding your audience and then seeing that on how do you best reach out to them, tying up to a larger conversation. I think this is where 2 or 3 things that one can do to kind of start that conversation to a potential critical mass, I guess.
Anyone has anything to add here? Okay, then let's move on to the part where we'll be discussing some recommendations. I would like to know some any few recommendations from Madhuri, Navya, and Nishant. You can also add. And I'll start with Madhuri. So based on your lessons learned through UNICEF's efforts connected to family-friendly policies, what are the long-term policies and protective measures that can result in improved results for marginalized workers? And I have a second part to this question. It would be great if you can share any examples of cross-sectoral engagement that enhanced the developmental outcomes for their children after the pandemic.
Sure. Thank you, Nimisha. See, before I get directly to the question that you asked me, I just wanted to also highlight to the audience here that UNICEF is actually moving into the whole gender transformative discourse in the Next Country program. So, the gender transformation discourse itself in itself is a challenge. I mean, we're really talking about, structural norms. We're talking about shift in power relations. We're really trying to look beyond the self-improvement of women and girls. So meaning that, all these years we've been talking about, working with women, important to kind of, really work through women and girls. So now it's like actually looking at the larger, ecosystem. How do we make the ecosystem more enabling? So it's pretty much, more relevant for the discussion that we are having today. So in that connection, we're actually looking at, working on the principles of early childhood development. So when we say early childhood development, we want to really work on not just, improving the women's or the mother's skills on, child rearing practices, but we really want to get the men and boys into the discourse. So, how do we address the whole care work discussion? I mean, is the care all about the mother's responsibility? Is the, rearing all about the mother's, 8 hours job? No, it isn't like that. So how do we really get men and boys to engage in this whole discourse? How do we really talk about shifting of social and gender norms in the work that we do? We're also looking at a whole big piece of work around value of girls. I think all the discussion that we're doing is, it's centered around the value of women and girls. So I think, giving that little background to the UNICEF work, UNICEF also has a very strong role in the way that we work on social and behavior change. That's one of our biggest chunk of work. And of course, when you talk about gender transformation, usually, all our minds kind of, get directed to the community and the society. But we are really in this new country program in UNICEF, we are actually looking at how we can work on gender transformative approaches at the policy, at the upstream policy advocacy discussions. I think that is where one of the questions from the audience also came as to how do you really look at bringing solutions. So we work to influence policies, whether it is at something like the Matritva Vandana Yojana, whether it is the Manrega. We really want to kind of ensure that it's not just a policy of a 5 years timeline, but how do we really constantly monitor, constantly regulate those discourses? If it's about 100 days for women, is she having access to those 100 days? Of what are the challenges that she actually encounters when she's actually trying to access that? What are her barriers at home? So, that kind of a research and analysis is something that really needs to go into the space so that we are able to inform the government, timely to kind of, bring about some changes, some tweaking to, possibly a long-term, solution for women in this space. So those are, multi-sectoral things that we are doing. We are also looking at how the whole social, the socio-ecological model, we're working at various levels. We're really looking at how, women and girls can be, the capacities can be equipped to kind of, break the whole, cycle about, moving out, asking for their own spaces, really making that move forward. We're working with communities, we're working with families through the social behavior change units. We're working with various outcome areas. We're working through health, we're working through nutrition. We're really doing some breakthrough, work across all our sectors that we are engaged in. There's a lot of focus on STEM, for girls. We're really looking at how girls can be really the digital divide. Nishant just spoke about, there's barely any access of mobile phones for girls. How the women were completely left out of the whole vaccine drive because women couldn't, perhaps women and girls, and I'm not trying to say this as a disadvantageous position, but they really couldn't find it very easy to navigate through the whole process. So how do we really look at those pieces, in more of discourses and discussions of girls in the STEM space, supporting them in skills, and really talking about the protection issues, making access possible for social protection policies and protection schemes and things, access possible for girls and women. I think it's a whole bunch of things that we are doing, but mostly because we don't directly implement, we really looking at working at the policy space. One last point that I wanted to add was, Tamisha, that there's this beautiful investment case. I shared the link with people here in the group. There's a family friendly policy. I mean, that is where we want to really make that dent in terms of making that family, that within the family space, a little friendly for the women, so that they are also equal contributors to the economy, equal contributors to the production processes, equal contribution to the formal economy. I think that's a must read. I mean, if colleagues would want to kind of get time. Yeah, I'll stop here, Tamisha.
Yes, I would request everyone to access the document and go through it also. And now I have a question for Navya as well. Could you also please share what are your recommendations to improve the social protection and quality of life of home-based workers?
Thank you so much, Timisha. So just I think I'm just going to pick recommendations that came through the study that we did on the impact of COVID-19. First of all, I think especially when it comes to social protection, I think we need to start leading with the belief that all women are workers. That's as simple as that. So that is, I think, going to be the base of everything. All women are workers and must be recognized as that. When it comes to home-based workers, I think, again, recognize them as workers. These women are working before the age of 18. They go on to work well beyond the age of 65 till their last breath, as many women say, and you do not recognize them as workers. So recognition of workers as workers is very, very important, and recognizing their contributions to your economy, to your society is very, very important. Once you recognize them, please register them and then create social protection programs. And as Madhuri said, when you create social protection programs, ensure that you talk to the workers that you're creating the programs for. Ensure that you are talking to the representative organizations of workers that you know, who have decades of experience in ensuring that these women have access to decent livelihoods and that they stay afloat, especially during shocks, economic shocks like COVID-19. And once you create them, ensure that you make them accessible, putting in place paperwork that is not available to them, bureaucracy that is not surmountable, defeats the entire purpose. In many cases, I think in India, a lot of the social protection programs or schemes that have been announced for vulnerable workers, including home-based workers, they're very, very conditional. I think one of the biggest examples would be, when it comes to maternity benefits, you have 2 crore live births, over 2 crore live births in India, and yet you're saying your maternity benefit, only 18 lakh women qualify for them. There itself, the conditions and the non-recognition that you have put in to ensure that these women do not access what is their right. So making it accessible, removing those conditions to accessibility are very, very important. And I think specifically in the context of COVID-19, I think immediately, and for them, I know all of us are roaming around without masks and without a care in the world, pretending that the pandemic is over. But for them, for their incomes, for their livelihoods, this is a period of deep recession, and therefore unconditional cash transfers to workers are a must. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Navya. And I think we all resonate with the point that you made, that all workers are workers, whether they are informal workers, and we all are working towards that. Madhuri or Nishant, if you would like to say anything or add anything to any, you can go ahead. Otherwise, we can.
Yeah, I just had a point to Navya's point. I completely agree about the cash transfers, but there's several other studies also which kind of really allude to the fact that though they have the cash to their accounts, the control is still something that is questionable. So maybe that's something also that we are all mindful of, and we're working towards it. Not to say that not to take away the benefits of the cash transfer. That's absolutely imperative. Yeah, over.
Nishant, you were also saying something?
I think pretty much Madhuri and then Navya have covered everything. I mean, all those good checklists. But I think I'll just say 2 things. One is, as BBC Media Action, we don't get into advising on policies and everything, because that's a strategic communication route that we take. But I think one point that I'll bring up again, which should go as a recommendation, which Madhuri mentioned earlier, is involving your audiences when you're designing those policies, right? Otherwise, you come across very attractive white papers about how promising the digital landscape in India is, and then the reality is that people are not able to even recharge it, and especially from the people from the informal sectors, because there is so much of loss of livelihood and cash crunch around it. So I think audiences' involvement in designing the policies will be very supreme. The second thing is like, there has to be, I mean, strategic communications around family planning policies or anything has to be seen as an investment instead of a cost. Somehow, I think when we're designing large scale programs and all that, the strategic communication becomes a very small part of what gets sent out on. It's like a report being published in social media, like, that it's like a document which is like a field activity being published, and that doesn't move the needle much, right? How does your audiences, like, get into the same kind of a attention space that you're wanting them to get? I mean, that doesn't work it that way. So I think investment on strategic and communication has to be, has to be kind of taken up very seriously and taken from the point of view as an investment, to see that, what are those metrics which will define if more resources can be put into an investment, right? So I think, for example, with funding from UNICEF only, we had done this transmedia television series called Adaful, which was targeted on gender norms and among adolescents. I think, and the research showed that, people who had watched the series had a significant positive influence on attitudes and confidence relating to coming of age issues and rejection of traditional gender norms, especially among young men, right? So I think these best cases need to be kind of, and I'm sure like there are cases across the sector where, engaging women or adolescents and creating allies, men allies about for all this has worked. So I think that has to be taken a little more seriously and a little more amped up, because when you switch on a channel or you see your phone, there is already so much of communication that's happening around, right? There is so much of clutter already, which is there in our minds. And I think we all are, as communication designers of communications, are competing with that mind space as well. So I think that investment has to be seen. And last point is that, I think this sector, in this sector, I think there is a lot to be done in terms of, like, finding out the true power of collaboration. That, how do we kind of map into each other's strengths instead of, like, repeating what all of us has done. I think with the Pride project, there is an opportunity that we have, which is, when we are very fortunate to have it, courtesy H&M Foundation, is where they're testing out this approach called collective impact, where, there are multi-sectoral partners all working towards improvement of life of informal waste pickers, right? So improvement doesn't mean that, you and I start respecting their work. It also means a lot of other things as well. Does the community have access to social security schemes? Does the community have access to domestic violence counseling sessions, for say, if there is a need? Does the community have access to schools where the dropouts from the communities can rejoin and come back to schooling? Because probably, like, because of finances or because of COVID, there have been a lot of dropouts and everything. So I think exploring that sweet spot where everyone is kind of talking about mutually reinforcing activities, complementing each other's strengths and everything. I think that's also a very important part of what future development programs will look like and future policies will advise on. So I think those three were all my submissions, but totally on board with what Madhuri and Navya were bringing up. And I think these are very, very important and critical points for those policies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nishant and Madhuri and Navya, for your answers. And I think our audience has some questions, and I'll start with the first question. Ms. Samriddhi is asking, how can public data be leveraged to understand the challenges and solutions towards inclusive economy? So would anyone like to take up that question? Madhuri? I can't hear you. You're
Can you just repeat that question, Tamisha?
How can public data be leveraged to understand the challenges and solutions towards inclusive economy?
So, I am perhaps not the best person to respond to this question, but all I can say is, it's actually, we have too many policies and schemes already in place. I mean, I've seen that, I think I was just trying to take one point from Nishant when he said about the power of collaborations. I think I can't agree more on that. I think there's already so many, schemes and programs and, plans in place. Where we are really falling short is perhaps to really leverage on each other's strength and really have that very collaborative voice together. I think when you look at n number of, schemes and programs, why don't we just really look at unpacking those programs, really speaking to the government, whosoever is at whatever place, can really take forward that discussion. And I think the challenge lies at the governance, the leakages, the issues around governance mechanisms and all of that. So how do we really unpack and unfold those issues, I think, is something that we need to put our heads together to think, Timisha. And I can't come from an economist lens, but I'm just saying this from the social sector lens. Yeah, over.
Okay,
for us also, Timisha, I mean, just to add, I mean, for example, when you design communication, there is already a lot of data which already exists. Like, because the kind of like the fascination is always to engage into a primary research. Right? So kind of find out everything by yourself instead of relying on something which is already there. So I think definitely data which is there out in the public domain for us as designer of communication, it has always played a huge role. I don't see why it cannot play a huge role when you're designing challenges as solutions towards inclusive economy as well. For example, communication that we're designing, it's again a solution to something that's already happening outside in that community as well. It's probably one part of the problem. But I think we have relied on a lot of public data to kind of put that kind of the communication across. For example, our partner Hasridallah, they had done a research to find out that that with the contribution of informal sectors, informal waste pickers to the waste management, the formal municipal corporation in Bangalore, which is the BBMP, they save around 84 crores annually because of the work that has been put in. So I think there is already a lot of data out there, which can definitely be used to scale solutions and cater to those challenges. The point is to kind of have a very unifocused lens on what exactly you're trying to solve and which kind of what is the inference that you're drawing from there. So I think yes, definitely public data has a huge role to play.
If I may come in here, Timisha. So basically, I think data, especially public data, data that the government recognizes, is a very, very important advocacy tool for civil society organizations. Because, I mean, especially in the context of home-based workers, who are largely invisible, even though our labor force surveys say that there are over 40 million home-based workers in India alone. They remain very, very visible. So when there are social protection programs, childcare initiatives that should be funded by the government, it's very, very important to have this data on our side. So therefore, there has been a large movement in India and across South Asia by representative organizations to push governments to ensure home-based workers figure in labor force surveys. This was not even the case a few decades ago. India has a very, very limited recognition of home-based workers, and even for the first few decades of the labor force surveys, home-based workers did not feature. It was by the work of the work of civil society that ensured this. We also, I think, ensured that piece rate workers be counted. However, this has been diluted over the decades, and now you don't see piece rate workers, which is actually the largest subset of home-based workers. So basically, you have invisibilized an entire sector of workers. That's why it is so important for us also to build that data alongside public data, because the government very, very easily invisibilizes them. And that's where we step in to visibilize them, to ensure that they have a voice, and that they are visible in supply chains and in all other marketplaces that they operate in. So data for advocacy, very much. Data for accountability as well, because without that, without saying that these women do not have access to worker rights, the worker entitlements, there will be no accountability even by brands, even by employers, and even by governments who benefit the most from the labor of these workers.
Thank you, Navya. And now
Just one. Yeah, just wanted to also comment on this, Tamisha. I think we should really look at some very good examples. I think there's a colleague in the audience who's also mentioning, there are very good examples like in the CSR space. So this whole, I'm sure colleagues know about it. This is called the PACE program, which was funded by the GAP International. It was like a global and many country program where female garment workers were the, were at the center of, the trainings. It was a capacity building program. So they've been able to really mobilize a huge support in that space, where female garment workers were actually trained, the capacity is built. They were actually picked up from this piece rate kind of, workers to come to a grade where they were, trained to become supervisors. So how do you really work and invest in that segment of the population is something that we can learn from very good examples across the globe. Because I think, there's a very piecemeal approach to the discussion that we do in this space. My apologies if I'm not, this is like misplaced, but I think we need to really kind of, expand the the discussion and the collectivization of voices in this space also. I think I'll agree with Navya when she said that, you really need to have more of consolidated, concerted voices and, CSOs coming together to really talk to the government about this. We can't be working in separate spaces, in small spaces, in our own silos. I think that's where that change needs to happen, and it needs to really happen faster than anything else. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Definitely, I also agree, and I think we all agree that all stakeholders need to come together to bring together, change in a sustainable manner. Another question, I think our audience have had more questions, so I'll just take one or two questions and then. So this question is for you, Nishant, I think. There's a one, Ramesh, Mr. Ramesh has he's asking that like there has been success on social media, but has the lives of informal waste pickers improved with the project? Any quantitative analysis or any data related to that? Or, you muted? Yes, you are muted.
Sorry. So the findings we presented was from the first of the 4 phases of the campaign. The project is going to run till December 2023. I think the right time to kind of answer that question would be then, when we have an endline evaluation data from a third-party evaluation agency, 3IE, that has been granted by the donor to kind of understand it. But I just want to kind of unpack one thing, that a very great point that Ramesh has said. I don't know, has the lives of informal waste pickers been improved? And I just want to kind of build that on what I was saying earlier, that for Samuhika Shakti, where the Pride project is one of those interventions that rests, for Samuhika Shakti, improvement of lives of waste pickers means a lot of things, right? Which means that waste picker families have more stable incomes, girls, women, and other vulnerable groups have equitable access to all outcomes. There is a career transition pathway, and there is a mechanism on which waste pickers can add on to life skills, can get trained on life skills as well. There are support system on domestic violence or substance abuse. There is access to social security, and then lastly, there is respect and recognition for the work they do, which BBC Media Action is slowly working on. But what we are hoping is that, as a sum total of all the efforts that all the partners are doing, I think definitely, we will be able to say that yes, lives of informal waste pickers have improved, but we'll have to see how and to what magnitude. There has definitely been progress. For example, just from in April, our partner CARE, they have trained just in April 311 waste pickers on life skills, right? And this is that they do add on these numbers month on month, and they have more than 5,000 kind of a target till the end of the project. Hasudala, who are again our partner in Bangalore, in April only they have successfully submitted 294 social security applications. Save the Children, who have been working hard to kind of get dropouts from waste picking communities back to the school. They are also in the process of opening STEM labs, in 25 schools. So I think the improvement will look like a sum total of all these individual efforts, I think. And I've been saying that, this Samahika Shakti program has been a very fantastic opportunity to us to work to see that, how can collaboration work also. Like, we have had some fantastic case studies of collaboration working in the program as well. And we're hoping to establish more case studies as we go down the future. So yes, December 2023 will be the good time to kind of answer if lives have.
Look forward to that.
Thank you.
So another question, I think it's directed at Madhuri. Is UNICEF looking at supporting care services targeted specifically at women working in informal economy?
Yeah, so I kind of responded to that, Timisha, already. But I just wanted to say that, UNICEF actually reiterating that we don't really work directly around, the informal sector work, but we really contributing because as part of our gender transformation work and early childhood development, which is definitely one of UNICEF stands for child rights, work. So we are actually looking at influencing public family-friendly policies in this space. And we also kind of work to strengthen guidelines as far as schemes such as Pradhan Mantri Matritya Vandana Yojana, Manrega. We're also looking at various other cash transfers programs in various states in the UNICEF intervention states. I think that is where we work a lot at the policy space, but we really don't kind of implement, if I may say so. Yeah, over.
I think this has been a very lively discussion, and I'm afraid we'll have to end now. It was really like the time has literally it passed away, and we didn't even realize actually. So, is there anything that Navya or Nishant or Madhu you would like to say? Before I start with the vote of thanks?
No, I just want to say, Timisha, that it has been a fantastic opportunity for us to kind of come here and talk about our work. And more importantly, I think these panel discussions, I think for me always has been a very good learning kind of opportunity as well. So hearing Madhuri, Navya, and some comments that was coming in the chat as well as the questions, I think these are very, very important kind of discussions that are happening. So very, very thankful for this opportunity, Timisha, and looking forward to more of them.
Okay then. Thank you everyone for taking out time and joining us today. I would also like to thank our esteemed panelists for an insightful discussion on informal workers in the context of inclusive economy that we should be thinking about more seriously. We learned today how women are overrepresented in the informal economy and low-wage jobs, such as domestic service and care labor and home-based workers, further contributing to gender disparity. There is a need to address this pressing issue of socioeconomic inclusion of informal economy workers, as their inclusion will further impact and improve the lives of families and children. Indeed, a lot of work needs to be done, and several institutions have already realized the importance of this work. At CFFPI, we believe that by bringing together different voices and experiences will surely scale up impact and help sustain positive change. So thank you, everyone. And I think looking forward to another discussion in near future.
Thanks, Timisha.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nishant.
Thank you, everyone.
Madhuri.
Thank you so much.